Hello, everyone. Get a look of you all on the big screen behind this little screen. Everyone had a rest or a lay down. I tried to bring this, there's a panel of the Buddha in one of the rooms doing the lying down meditation. I'll work it out in the next day or two. It's actually one of the popular Buddhist images. Any of you who are Tuesday born, it might be your primary posture, to lie down on your right side, your hand under your head. And it's said that he did that a lot. Some of the Burmese nuns and monks were known for their awakening in the lying down posture. That's a nice image to hold. And of course, you're in your own spaces. You can do whatever you want. You can try all the postures and in whatever order and whatever style that makes you feel balanced and awake enough. We encourage the experimentation and playfulness. Let's see if I can get you back on gallery. Okay. So today I want to talk about the 5 spiritual strengths that develop from our practice and are also the currents that carry us along and develop the practice. And these five strengths are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. The first one, faith, can be a tenuous, triggering word for many. It's also translated as trust and confidence, and perhaps makes more sense in our experiential process and practice, because then we feel the emotion of a building trust, a building faith that's developing, culminating in this unfettered trust. In what? In ourselves, ultimately. In ourselves enough to take the first steps on the path. And those of you who have been on the path for a long time know how that develops, know how that quality of trust and confidence gradually matures. One of the first things U Pandita said to me when I went to the Mahasi Monastery in Rangoon a long time ago and ordained as a monk to practice for a long time, was that he said that that faith is all of spiritual practice. That developing faith, sustaining faith, and its maturity into unfettered faith or unflappable trust, total trust, is the beginning, middle, and end of practice. So many of us practice long enough to reach a place where we do have a unshakable faith in the process. It doesn't mean we're finished. We're still refining the practice. We haven't crossed the floods, as it said, the floods of greed, hatred, delusion. But we have a good feel for the currents and how to navigate through those currents and to reach little restful eddies and know how to work with opposition, know how to work with forces that seem challenging, oppressing. So in the beginning, another literal translation by a scholar of the Pali term for faith or trust is to put one's heart upon something. So we give our hearts over to a process whenever we sit to practice, or whenever we go to a retreat. And there's especially in the days where we had in-person retreats, and there's teachers and one-on-one interviews every day or every other day. And the traditional or combination of traditional and contemporary, such as our annual January fusion retreat, where there's a monastic Burmese nun and monk, and some of us Western teachers, so that a container is provided where you feel you're getting some of the traditional ancient lineage that's been passed down for thousands of years, as well as modern and contemporary metaphors and how it's been filtered through the Western psyche and presented by those of us who have had Asian teacher training, and can blend in some of the ways in which we feel like we're receiving and belonging to and entering both that ancient lineage and the practical modern interpretation of that, how it works in our lives, how it makes sense in our lives. But at the beginning, there's that vulnerability and tenderness. Traditionally, what do we put our faith in? It's the triple gem. So when we took the refuges in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, we're aligning our heart, our chitta, heart, mind, our consciousness, with that Buddha imago, that Buddha energy, which if we have some knowledge of the historical Buddha might have meaning for us, inspiration, but also it's the kernel of awakening, because Bud, from the root of Buddha, means being awake, that we all have, that we all carry. So to feel that quality within us of awakening, that potential, and in moments of powerful mindfulness or transformative insight, where we have a glimpse of how things really are, there's a sudden rush and deeper meaning of putting our faith in that Buddha image, imago, especially within. And naturally, we expect to feel that the safety of a refuge. So if we're taking the refuges, we want to feel a safe harbor if we align our heart, put our trust in that kernel of awakening of the Buddha, whether it's the historical one, the imagined Buddha, when we practice the kernel of awakening within our hearts. And the refuge of the Dhamma is, of course, as Bhikkhu Bodhi, the American monk, says, it's the true refuge. It's the one refuge. The other ones are part of it, but we're aligning and aspiring to this awakening Dhamma, this liberating Dhamma, the truth. That for most is what might develop and feel like the emotion of faith and confidence truly develop when we have little glimpses of things working the way they work in the body and mind, the exchange, the cause effect of body sensation, mental states, bodily sensations, and so forth. and just the expansion of that understanding. And then particularly when we drop into seeing the wisdom natures, when we get a real glimpse, the first times that we really glimpse, unfiltered by the intellect, conceptual process of impermanence, the anicca nature Michelle was talking about. That feels like a lift in confidence. That feels like it's moving along in the maturation process U Pandita was saying when he said all of spiritual practice is the development, maturity, and a final unfettered faith. That is our practice, that defines our practice. So we catch that current when we take the refuges. In terms of the Sangha, Bhikkhu Bodhi refined that understanding. We don't take refuge when we take refuge in the entire Sangha. We take refuge in the nuns, monks, laywomen, and laymen who over 2,600 years are awakened or awakened enough to be trustworthy guides. It's an important refinement. I know sometimes that can be confusing. How do we place our heart and trust upon an entire community when we really don't know the degree of development of members of that community? So to specifically call up or imagine, and especially if we have contact in our own practice with those who have practiced enough that we do feel the goodness of that connection, that guidance, the spiritual friendship, that we can put our trust in that. Like the Buddha, U Pandita often after a talk would ask me if I believed what he said. The Buddha would do this with his top disciples as well. And it was okay, but the best answer wasn't, oh yeah, that's really cool. It was right on, Sayadaw. Often he didn't say anything, or he'd say, well, why do you believe that? What he really liked was that, well, it sounds correct. It feels true, but I don't know. So no, I hear it, but I don't believe it. And something like that or something like that would be his favorite answer. Because when the Buddha did that, say with Sariputta, or one of his top lay disciples or senior nuns who were awakened themselves, they would answer, no, Blessed One, I don't believe what you're saying. And he would answer, well, good. Take the elements of the practice that are useful, such as mindfulness and energy. Go into the forest, sit under a tree or in an empty hut or on a mountaintop. It's cool, it's a safe place, so it's a refuge. And see for yourself. Put these strengths to test. I forget if I even named all the strengths, but they're faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. I think I did name them. As we do experientially have contact with what's true, then it's called what's said verified or confirmed faith. And then it becomes more the emotion that we might be familiar with. We have confidence, or we have greater trust in the practice process. We give in to the currents that we're developing, such as these 5 strengths or the 7 awakening factors. There are many among the 37 enlightenment qualities. There are many groupings like this. This is a simple one and often a useful one because we can have an immediate resonance as we're practicing. We can feel the degree of our lack of confidence. Of course, we have to face doubt. We have to face the opposite of confidence. And being realistic, there's degrees of doubt that are useful, such as saying to Sayadaw, that was a clear talk. I resonated with it. I'm not sure if it's true. Well, good. Then, go to your cottage, go to your meditation hut, and practice, and see if some of the things I talked about today are true for you. And that would start a dialogue, and that would increase, for me, that would increase the trust I placed in him as the singular important teacher of my life for over 35 years. And the resonance I had, especially in times of struggle, when he would see, and I'd have so much trust in him that I felt, even though it was vulnerable, I felt free to let him see all of whom I am, or, to cry, or to say it was difficult, or to say I'm really having a hard time. And he had ways of untangling. Many of you know that the image I use of a skein of yarn, and that doubt is like the skein of yarn, in which there's just this entangled bundle of thread, and just it's so compacted, and doubt has the effect of chronic indecisiveness, or doubting our ability to practice, or doubting the Dhamma, doubting there's really a path of liberation, and so forth. It can paralyze practice. So of the 5 hindrances of sense desire, distraction, and aversion, distraction, sleepiness, distraction, restlessness, distraction, doubt, the 5th hindrance, is the strongest of them, especially as it's rooted in delusion, in ignorance. So he would say, he'd say it's hard, Dhammadaja, that was my monk's name. It's hard to see doubt when doubt is entered into the heart, mind, the chitta. Hard to see it. What you can see are some of the other elements that come in when there is doubt, like disappointment, fear, longing, longing for something else, your home, your friends, familiar food and family, and so forth, disappointment, shame. These were things I'd report to him, and why he finally said, I understand. The difficulty is doubt, and you can't see it right now. You have to unravel the skein of yarn a string at a time, and see that disappointment. Recognize, feel, know, sense, understand disappointment. And then the next string of fear, of anxiety, of restlessness, of desire, of anger, frustration. So bit by bit, I pulled these different threads of the yarn apart until I sensed what doubt is. It's an emotion. It just doesn't have the intensity and gravity of other emotions that are often intensely pleasant, or clearly pleasant, or clearly unpleasant. Doubt is a delusion element. So it may just be a neutral fog that's there, but covering everything and preventing access to our energy to do this practice. So Sayadaw, like the Buddha, encouraged reason and experience to kind of get in there with the elements that are our body. It's not that our body contains the elements of sensation, of textures, hard and soft, and hot and cold, fluidity and cohesion, pressures and movement, vibration. It's that these elements are the body. They are the body. So if we want to know them, we immerse into them. By we, meaning our practice elements, mindfulness, trust, energy, concentration, and the intention to understand what's happening. These are the body. When we start to have a feeling for what the body really is, and not just this is happening, this pain or this aching is happening in my back or in my knee or in my shoulders, rather directly arising with that aching or with that pain, feeling the pressure, the heat, the tightness, the tension, then there's a knowing. There's an understanding, if only a glimpse, that increases our confidence, increases our energy. Because of mindfulness, we're investigating, feeling out what is the nature of this body from within the body. It's often spoken of like, to know the body within the body, which means the internal direct experience of when we're sitting, what's happening, what's the actuality, what's the felt sense experience, pleasant or unpleasant. That's often pretty clear. What might be less clear is the intricate natures of pressure and tension, heat, pinpricks, movement, expansion, contraction, propelling, collapsing, all those energies. So as we experience that, so our faith increases. It's said that the ultimately having that complete trust in the Dhamma is like birds that trust a tree where they build their nests. To trust the tree where the birds build their nests is similar to trusting this liberating truth. As we understand the body and the mind and experience through the senses as it really is, then we have this unconditional trust, unfettered faith. The next strength is energy. U Pandita would translate the Pali term virya as courageous energy, because it took the courage of a lioness or a lion to be vulnerable, to face the Dhamma nature of our experience, the real nature, the truth of the body and the truth of the mind, truth of our vulnerability, of our strivings, disappointments, aspirations, our joys, our ecstasies, our sorrows, and so forth. Takes this strength of courageous energy to be willing to face it, and in a retreat sense, like we're doing for 6 days, to face it all of our waking hour. Often we say there's really only one practice session each day, and it goes from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. We just change postures. Try to make everything we do our awareness field. The best quality of energy comes out of rest, relaxation. In discourses, the Buddha spoke of this deep quality of viveka, which also means seclusion or solitude from the hindrances. But here I'm using it as profound rest, profound relaxation. So the true virya comes out of that place of rest. One of the discourses has a devata, a celestial being, coming to the Buddha and saying, "Dear sir, how did you cross the flood of greed, hatred, delusion?" And the Buddha responded, by not halting, friend, and by not straining, I crossed the flood. And the devata said, "But how is it, dear sir, that by not halting and by not straining, you cross the flood?" And the Buddha responded, "When I came to a standstill, friend, then I sank. But when I struggled, then I got swept away. It is this way, friend, that by not halting and by not straining, I cross the flood." And this is Bhikkhu Bodhi, the American monk's translation. And it points out here the subtlety of our middle way, our middle path. And the subtlety in this energy is that its beauty is inherently, it shines light on the mystery of non-identification. Because if we're identified with our energy, we're sure to either struggle, strain, strive, drive, or to stagnate, halt, and sink. So we're already dipping into the wisdom of non-identification, understanding the wisdom of anatta, or not self, which by nature and also inherent in a moment of pure mindfulness doesn't identify with what is felt, what is seen, what is observed. It doesn't judge and doesn't proliferate on it. Proliferating just means all the follow-up thoughts, interpretations, and assessments that we might have about a sensation or an emotion or a sight, thought, or anything. Rather just coming from that restful, relaxed place and that balanced energy that's not driving or not stagnating, not halting, just being with what is, the what isness of phenomena. In recollecting my own times of practice over long periods, so many times I felt driven. Sometimes I was competing with myself. Sometimes I was wanting to please Sayadaw U Pandita. I would, when I finally would crash and try and assess what was happening, I just learned to look more at motivation, at intention. What is it? Because even Sayadaw sometimes would admonish me or reprimand me for trying too hard, and insist that I only practice so many hours of sitting at a time, or if I was striving, back to 1 hour sit, 1 hour walk. If I was going to sit more, then I had to walk just as long. Trying to get me back in stride, back in the rhythm of balance. I heard this morning Eve talk about losing her mom recently, and then Michelle said that someone else also had lost their mom earlier this year. It reminded me of what I did when my dad died, which I was fortunate I was present for, and it was very, very powerful. I couldn't grieve at the time. So my reflections on hearing of your mom's deaths, was like, yeah, for me personally, it was a timing thing. And the energy I had, could I make a shelter for grief at that time? Ironically, it was just before we started these fusion retreats in Burma a long time ago, 1996, and before we started the Metta Dana project, school and hospital, and supporting several nunneries and so forth. And my dad and mom had wanted to come to Burma, but my dad got sick, and so he died. Some part of me thinks, again, that mystery of timing. He died so I could go to Burma and these projects could start, because at the time they weren't even an idea. They weren't even born. They were born because I went to practice, do a self-retreat in a monastery in Upper Burma, and out of the friendship with Sayadaw U Lakana, this lovely, gentle, boundlessly metta-filled monk. And out of that friendship, and 6 months later, after the retreat, we started the retreat center there for Westerners and helping the school and so forth. And that's how it's evolved over these years. It was 4 years later, Eve, and any of you who have lost a parent recently or a loved one, it was 4 years later that that the timing was right. And I went to a very remote place in Shan State in Upper Burma. And it was at a time when, another time, when Burma wasn't working very well. It hasn't seemed to be working very well for a very long time now. So I found a place, and it was a nice shelter and protection. It was a safe place. And it's where I built a shelter to grieve. And I wept and then felt all these tears, and felt my father, and felt everything, reviewed how in the last 8 months of his life, how close we grew. We touched in ways we hadn't, and since I was 12 years old, I massaged his head and his feet, and very healing process in the dying process that was there. So I came to have profound trust in the timing of things that we can't control. It's just something, we know it when it's there. And to grow the patience, and to still, the stallion-like energy that wants to break out when it's not helpful, and to move forward when it feels like, we're stagnating, holding on, or halting. A good friend of Michelle's and mine for many, many years is Robert Aiken Roshi, Zen master in Honolulu. And this is from his book, The Practice of Perfection. The first lesson is that distraction or obstruction are just negative terms for your context. Circumstances are like your arms and legs. They appear in your life to serve your practice. As you become more settled in your purpose, your circumstances begin to synchronize with your concerns. Chance words by friends, books, poems, even the wind in the trees brings precious insight. chance words by friends, books and poems, even the wind in the trees brings precious insight. So it's a great strength to understand the skillful application of this energy quality, and to see its relationship, its balance with qualities like timing and patience. It directly balances with concentration, which I'll talk about after I talk about the third of the five strengths. The third of the five strengths is mindfulness. In some of the ancient suttas, it's replaced with equanimity, faith, energy, equanimity, concentration, and wisdom. But here I'm going to just present it as it's more commonly presented, as mindfulness. And what is it that we're mindful of? We're mindful of what the Buddha called our ancestral home. And what is our ancestral home? Our ancestral home is what we can feel, sense, and know directly, unfiltered by concepts, intellect, interpretation, judgment, fabrication, all the proliferations. And so what is that? The body, and they're not in order. They all happen at the same time, but we present them in this way because it's helpful in terms of incorporating them into our practice. The body, and body as in terms of the four postures of the body, in terms of understanding the body in movement, why we practice walking meditation, and transitions from one posture to the next, and the body in its most subtle cellular level, the elemental body nature, as I mentioned previously. The element of the earth is texture, hard, soft, smooth, rough, granular, silky, touch and textures. That's something we can know directly, so it's real, it's felt experience, it's not imagined, it's not a thought form. And water element is all the ways in which, combined with the other elements, it forms into a cohesion, why our body stays together, or why we feel, a knot of heat or pressure or tightness, or a plate of tension, or waters form not only in cohesion, but waters form in fluidity. When we feel fluid sensations moving down our leg or our back or through our head and around our heart. And the third element, the fire element, of course, is the range of temperatures, hot and cold and warm. It too can combine with the water element. And so we feel, areas that are tense with cold in the body, and other areas that are more fluid at different temperature. That kind of exploration is really useful for breaking up our identification with the body. And then the last element of the air element, or tension, firmness, how we can sit up, how we can stand, and how we can move. We need that physical tension to be able to do that, although we would collapse without that aspect of the air element. And the other end of the spectrum of the air element is movement, oscillation, pulsation, vibration. So they're all happening at the same time. They all come up at once, but one may predominate, one or two may predominate. So that's how we know the body as the body, or the body within the body. The second foundation of mindfulness are feelings, in terms of the affect, moment to moment affect with regard to the body and the mind, or the six senses. Uncontrolled, a feeling tone will arise with every moment of sight, sound, fragrance, flavor, bodily sensation, a thought, emotion. The feeling tone is either pleasant, unpleasant, or happy if it's a mental, emotional state, unhappy, or neutral, a neutral feeling tone. Neutral often can be based either in delusion, we kind of really don't know what's going on, or it can be based in wisdom and more like a quality of heart emotion of equanimity, mental equipoise, evenness, balance, cool mind empty of objectification and striving, clinging, stagnation. Very valuable as a practice doorway, as a gateway to awakening, because we often mistake pleasant feeling with attachment, or we mistake an unpleasant feeling for aversion. And then we're trying to either hold on to the pleasant feeling, so it's more attachment. We're trying to push away the unpleasant feeling, cultivating then aversion. And we end up cultivating attachment and aversion and being deluded about it. So we're cultivating greed, hatred, and delusion, because we don't just see that, oh, wait a minute, what's behind this aversion? Oh, this is just an unpleasant sensation or sight or sound. Or this is an unpleasant thought formation process, an unpleasant emotion. And likewise, what's behind this grasping and this holding on? And we feel the pain of that. We feel the tension of grasping, of attachment, of clinging. And we just look behind it and we say, oh, that's because it's a pleasant feeling. Joy or tingling sensations running up my spine, and happy thoughts and happy emotion, lovely visual experience, lovely sounds, and that sense of wanting it not to go away, fear that's going to go away. So wanting more, holding on, and so forth, and repeating that habit, and therefore cultivating that, when all it is they're all uncontrollable. They're not good or bad. They're just feeling tones. One is pleasant, one is unpleasant, the other is neither pleasant or unpleasant. Thus, that understanding changes the whole cycle. Jesse mentioned this morning the dependent origination process of how we end up either in suffering or happiness. And right there's a link between feeling tone and craving and attachment. So without mindfulness, it's going to go from feeling tone to craving or attachment to the pleasant, aversion, pushing away, craving to be rid of the unpleasant, or delusion about the neutral. With awareness, with mindfulness and wisdom, that link is broken. And feelings, then for feeling tone, conditions more awareness and wisdom. And the cycle is broken. And we see how conditionality then leads to happiness and more happiness. The body feelings, the third of the ancestral homes that we come to know is chitta, the heart, mind. Everything that it is initially through thought formations and images and emotions, down to its subtlest level of moment to moment consciousness stream. Like everything else, it's impermanent. Consciousness is conditional. It arises with experience. That's why we practice the sixth sense door awareness, so we can understand and see seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, sensing consciousness, and thinking or knowing consciousness, with consciousness itself being not static and unbroken and permanent. Consciousness itself also being not self, not lasting, having a condition elements come together. And the fourth of the foundations is, could just say, phenomena. All the other phenomena that is experienced, that we're conscious of, that is within the mind and heart. Practically speaking, we could say we can know this phenomena as we are aware of seeing and hearing, sensing, thinking, or knowing. That's our ancestral home, because that's the entirety of our experience, near and far, microscopic and macroscopic. It's everything, and it's everything that we need to know. So they all rise at once. And often, just for an easier progression, we start with the body and the extension of the body in the senses. The senses are also the body. And so when we encourage you to try and hold pleasant or unpleasant emotions or thoughts in the body, we don't just mean the physical body. Sometimes the visual will help. When I was mourning my father, I was in a very beautiful mountainous place in the Shan state, and I often use visual space as a container, safe harbor for the grief, for the tears, for the mourning. Our soundscape too. That's the body. So it's very protective, and we still feel within our ancestral home rather than scattered by a difficult or painful emotion, or a very ecstatic emotion, which can also be scattering to our consciousness and our heart through the expansion of sound and awareness of sound, and holding the awareness of sound as we also feel the emotion. Elementally, that's how I went through 6 weeks of grieving my dad because it was the right time. The timing, the location, the space, the conditions, that was the time. I couldn't predict it. It just fell that way. And we can also use our imagination. So many ways to use the imagination when we're experiencing powerful feelings or emotions. Imagining places. I mentioned the other day a friend who often, when they need a neutral place, and like we've been for many years, this friend is a traveler. So she imagines the hotel room and the neutrality of it. Hotel rooms are often just plain, white or creamy colored walls and white sheets or white pillows. So that was her place to connect with equanimity, to feel a neutral feeling tone and relax into equanimity to help hold difficult stuff at work. So the strengths, confidence, courage, or energy, mindfulness, then concentration, samadhi. A Pali teacher I once had at the University of Hawaii translated samadhi as perfectly put together. And I keep finding that useful. I keep revisiting that. It means the unification of the body and mind. It's the opposite of distraction. It's like when all the little rivulets collect in the stream, and the stream fills up a pond, and the pond is still and deep and clear, undisturbed. That's what a moment of concentration is like. And together with all these other strengths, with the confidence, courage, mindfulness, and the wisdom that follows, it's a sustaining quality that, so there's a continuous stream of this arising samadhi moment, concentrated moment, focused moment, where there's not distraction. It's how we overcome the hindrances to practice. So another opposite of concentration is like sense desire. When we want this lovely sight to continue, or sound to continue, our sensation, or imagination movie that's going on within. Sometimes, as we also have said, we use distraction on purpose, as a healthy defense survival strategy. When things are really difficult, then we purposefully can distract and kind of know we're doing that, because at the time, that's our safe harbor. It's our kind of go-to place. We don't feel overwhelmed or swept away. The text describes samadhi as not losing awareness of what's happening in and around us in the present moment, like a complete convergence of all the associated skillful states, mindfulness, and energy, whatever degree of wisdom is there, wise reflection, confidence that sustains our interest in what's happening, and just stays with it. Taken to, in and of itself, to a meditation in and of itself, it becomes fixed concentration, which brings a lot of joy and happiness, ecstatic states to the mind, all of which don't depend on external environmental conditions being pleasant. It does, however, depend on the sustainability of the concentration itself. So if the conditions for concentration fall away, then so do those profound states of joy and happiness fall away. So generally in our Vipassana practice, we're using just enough concentration that's right on the edge of being absorbed in the way fixed concentration practices are. But instead of going into absorption on one thing for the purpose of peace and joy and ecstasy and those other delicious qualities, it's being fluid and able to absorb, so to speak, in the flow of experience as it is, the transitory nature of experience, absorbed into anicca nature, which is very liberating, and why it immediately can lead to an insight moment. Because wisdom, the fifth strength, is intuitive, luminous, not filtered at all through the mind, through thoughts. Just suddenly the conditions come together, can't control it, and we see the as it is nature. As Michelle and Jesse have spoken of, we feel, it's a visceral felt sense connection with transitory nature, just pulsating, arising and passing, arising and passing. It's often the first most significant and liberating insight that we have. It's a sea change. It's a path changing course. Once we have a sense, oh yeah, we don't even know what happens at first, because usually thought or reflection does not happen simultaneous with that insight, with that intuitive moment of knowing. It happens some moments or minutes later. And then, as our teachers advise, they say it's okay to be with those reflections, but at some point, notice that the reflections are going on, so you don't identify with them and you don't stop the process. So real wisdom here it isn't something that we do, and it isn't something to do with the mind's capacity to reflect or imagine or think. It's not that kind of mental formation, and it doesn't judge or assess or analyze. It's it sidesteps all of that. It's like a light that immediately illumines a room. Suddenly we see, and we see, and we've heard it all, we've read it before, or we've had glimpses in the past. But that moment where we really immerse into an anicca insight is this convergence of the confidence, of the courageous energy, of the mindful awareness, and of the concentration that's not distracted and totally on the edge of absorption, but it's absorbed into the process nature, transitory nature of phenomena. That's a very liberating moment. You can't mistake it because it feels like a release. The mind feels happy, joy for no reason at all. It's not dependent on external conditions. It's a Dhamma joy, a Dhamma happiness. Doesn't have to be pleasant, anything, sights, sounds, sensations, mental states. It's just the truth. And the truth is always liberating. The truth always brings this sense of uplifting, non-sensual joy. That's why, that's what we're doing all the time. You know, the sweat that we go through, the blood, sweat, and tears that we go through to do this practice. And part of the practice is like the recollection of a loss, you know, recent loss or losses long ago. And we try to get to the core of the experience, which is what we're feeling now, but separate it from the story, because then we're vulnerable to identification, and we actually stop the process of being able to go through a mindful mourning process, a grieving process. So to be able to learn to be able to feel the grief and grieve without the story behind it really, really helps. And that's why I spent 6 weeks at it. Naturally, I'd have images and feelings of my father and his presence and all that he gave me over my life, and all the goodness that he was and expressed. You know, I felt it come. So I have these memories, these visual memories, our visceral sense of his presence. But I did my best to lean into the actual felt emotion and sensations and feeling tones and phenomena that was happening, not the story about it. That's today's Dhamma talk. So for the rest of the day and the days that come, you might at times pause and reflect or feel the qualities, these strengths, the strength of confidence, its growth, its faltering, you know, the doubts that come, to feel the energy, to feel where it is we stagnate or stop and sink, and where it is we strive and push and drive ourselves. And the great balancer and initiator of mindfulness itself, which by nature disidentifies, cultivates and balances faith with wisdom. So it doesn't become blind faith, and wisdom doesn't become intellectual understanding, but it becomes a true confirmed faith because of the luminous nature of intuitive, immediate understanding that increases and confirms that faith and matures it. And then the faith empowers the energy, which needs to be balanced with concentration. There's just enough energy and just enough focusing power. Walking is really good for that. The walking meditation is just I have never found a posture that's more conducive to integrating, merging the stream of energy and the stream of a fluid meditative concentration to come together. Thank you for your practice.